I had only had 2 glasses of Jack Daniels when my weekend fell apart, and it wasn't even 3 p.m. on a Friday. As a reporter for a small newspaper in the Midwest, I had the day off after working late, hoping to take a quiet nap in my favorite chair and chat with my beloved wife. But when I got home, I found 2 cars in the driveway. One belonged to my wife, Jennifer, who I'd been living with for the past 7 years, and the other was unfamiliar. It was strange to see Jennifer home in the middle of the afternoon since she usually worked from 8 to 5 as an actuary at an insurance company. Despite the oddity, I trusted our marriage and walked into the house without any suspicion. But what I found inside shattered my world. From our upstairs bedroom came the unmistakable sounds of 2 people in an intimate act, loud, passionate, and unmistakable. The door was open, which meant they had no idea someone could be watching, and the moans and cries were getting louder. I rushed up the carpeted stairs, entered the bedroom, and overheard their conversation. A man I didn't recognize was asking my wife about her desires, and she was responding with audible pleasure. When I reached the doorway, an unexpected scene unfolded before me. My beautiful wife was on her back with another man who looked like a football player, giving her incredible pleasure. It was clear he was satisfying her in ways I never had. Although Jennifer had never expressed any discontent with me, it was obvious that I wasn't meeting her needs. As I watched the scene, my world crumbled. Trying to keep my composure, I yelled, "Don't mind me, carry on." I grabbed my gym bag from the closet and started packing my things. Jennifer and her lover, David, were caught in a compromising position. Jennifer quickly apologized, saying they were planning to tell me about their affair. I couldn't help but respond sarcastically, "Really? Maybe for our 10th anniversary?" It was clear this wasn't a one-time thing. "If you cared, you would have told me earlier." David stopped moving on top of Jennifer, but she kept trying to look at him as we talked. "It doesn't matter," I said, "I'm just going to take some things and leave. I'll come back for the rest over the next few days. I'll have my lawyer prepare all the documents." Then I added, "By the way, what kind of caveman are you with?" David laughed, saying, "I'm her lawyer, I work for one of the big firms downtown." "Great," I said as I left the house, not bothering to close the front door behind me. After throwing my stuff in my Ford F-150, I headed straight to my favorite spot. It wasn't the best way to start the weekend, but most bars are empty on a weekday, and the Rusty Nail was no exception. Even my favorite bartender, Neil, wouldn't start his shift until 4. So, I just sat in my seat and thought, I should have seen this coming. The last time we attended one of Jennifer's work events, her colleagues barely hid their disdain for me, and by the end of the night, I could tell she was starting to agree with their negative opinions about my job and my ability to support the lifestyle she wanted. Jennifer openly compared our salaries, making it clear she earned twice as much as I did. That night, on the way home, we had a tense conversation about her behavior, during which she accused me of being drunk. I wasn't satisfied with her excuse, but I didn't hold a grudge, and after a few days, we made up, or at least I thought we did. Now, sitting in the bar, I knew I had to take steps to secure my finances, but at this moment, I didn't care. My credit card was in my name only, so I could spend the night drinking. Jennifer and I met in college in the Midwest and started dating during our junior and senior years before I proposed. We understood that if I couldn't land a job at a major newspaper in a big city, she would likely always make more than me. But we agreed that our incomes would be shared, no mine or yours. At least, that's what I thought until recently. I'm not sure if her colleagues influenced her change in behavior, but it seems she stopped respecting me and maybe even stopped loving me. Later, when Neil arrived, I gave him the short version of what had happened earlier that day and handed him my car keys, telling him to call me a cab later but not to give me back the keys until the morning. He thought it was a severe measure. Around 9 p.m., a state trooper entered the bar looking for Mr. Sam Lawson. Neil pointed me out, and the officer approached slowly, moving with grace. In a fog of confusion, I realized he wanted to share news that couldn't wait. He informed me that my wife, Jennifer, and a man named David Price had died tragically in a semi-truck accident in town. The authorities had been looking for me for hours until one of my friends mentioned my usual spot, a bar. Confused and devastated, I shouted, "Drinks are on me." "There's a God in heaven," I proclaimed, prompting cheers from those around me. But Officer Reginald Masters seemed stunned by my unexpected reaction to the news of my wife's death. "Mr. Lawson, I understand you must be in shock," he began, but I interrupted him. "It's not shock, friend. It's relief," I said, babbling that I had caught my wife cheating on me that day. I was going to leave her, and now she was dead. The officer looked surprised, but I didn't care. We usually prefer that the closest relatives identify the body for confirmation, but I don't think Mr. Lawson can help today, Masters told Neil. Could you make sure he gets a message asking him to come to the coroner's office tomorrow? Neil nodded, understanding the situation. Despite my heavy intoxication, I knew that while I might miss my unfaithful wife when I sobered up, our relationship had ended. At that moment, my anger towards Jennifer outweighed any love I still had for her. The next morning, I woke up in my truck's cab feeling uncomfortable and sick. I must have looked terrible, but I managed to return to the bar, pick up my keys, and head to a hotel. However, the officer's words from the night before lingered in my mind, and I decided to drive back to my empty house, thinking about Jennifer and the 9 years we had spent together, the last 7 as husband and wife. What bothered me the most was how our relationship ended. I wasn't particularly grieving, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt that both Jennifer and her lover got what I believed they deserved. After freshening up, I went to the morgue to identify the bodies. Jennifer's body was bruised from the accident involving a truck and a convertible. I asked to see David's body, which looked just as bad as Jennifer's. I hoped his death had been less painful. When I got home, I realized I had 3 difficult calls to make, one to my parents, another to Jennifer's parents, and another to her sister, Allison. Although I was sad about her death, every memory of her was overshadowed by the image of her with her lover, and it was hard to feel genuine sadness. I decided to focus on presenting the facts and keeping my emotions in check, but I couldn't help but feel compassion for Ron and Cindy Jacobs, Jennifer's parents. Ron and Cindy were like family to me, almost as dear as my own parents. The thought of them going through the loss of their daughter broke my heart. I knew it wouldn't be easy to deliver the news. First, I called my parents. My mom, the emotional one, broke down crying immediately upon hearing the news. My dad, on the other end of the line, was calmer and asked for details. Reluctantly, I told him that Jennifer had been in the car with David Price at the time of the accident. I could tell he was about to ask a question, and my hesitation probably gave me away. Jennifer was having an affair with her lawyer friend, I finally admitted. My dad, always perceptive, quickly picked up on my unspoken words. Why was she with him and not home with you? He asked. Because she wasn't with me, Dad. I caught her in our bed with David, so I left. It was obvious this wasn't their first meeting, so I packed my stuff in the car for about 6 hours. I think they were on their way to dinner. I'm so sorry to hear that. It must be tough, he said. By then, my mom had calmed down and joined the conversation. She had heard enough to understand the situation. Are you sure she cheated on you, Sam? It's not something to dwell on if you're not sure. I cut the conversation off abruptly and said bluntly, Mom, I caught them in the act. I know what I'm talking about. Have you talked to Ron and Cindy? My dad asked. I'll try to say as little as possible, Dad, unless they start interrogating me like you. I won't lie if they ask, and then everything might come out. Son, remember you're at a disadvantage. Show them the respect they deserve. Yes, sir, I replied solemnly. Talking on the phone with Jennifer's parents was like talking to my own. While her mother was devastated, her father quickly realized that at the time of her death, Jennifer was with another man when she should have been with me. Is there something you're not telling me, Sam? Ron asked while Cindy cried in the background. Jennifer should have been with her husband at that moment, not with another man in the car. It doesn't make sense, son, he shouted, sobbing into the phone. Jennifer cheated on me. I found her in bed with the man she died with, so I packed up and left. It seemed like they no longer cared about hiding it, and they ran off together. You saw them together in your home? Ron was in shock. He couldn't believe his daughter, whose death had just been reported, had cheated on her husband and died in a car with her lover. Yes, Ron. Yes. Right now, I am full of anger towards her, and strangely, I am pleased that both she and her lover met their end. They got what they deserved. Though I regretted saying those harsh words to her father, they were undeniably true. He started yelling at me over the phone, but I cut him off decisively. They drove her to this, Ron, and that's why she started an affair, Cindy said. She demanded his attention and affection, but he didn't give it to her, her parents said to each other. I definitely don't want to be with her when my time comes. Just tell me which funeral home your family prefers, and I'll make sure the body gets there. I'll handle the organizational and financial aspects, you and Cindy take care of the rest, like the service. Of course, I won't be attending. You can't ignore the fact that she was a part of your life, son, Ron said calmly. You and she were together for nearly 10 years. You can't convince me that none of this meant anything. It's possible, and it happened, I responded. Our relationship ended the moment I caught her with David Price in our bedroom. Why should her death change my feelings? Maybe in time, you'll feel differently and regret not saying goodbye properly, Ron said softly. I doubt it, I whispered back. The funeral took place at Ron and Cindy's church, the same one where Jennifer and I exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other. The irony of fate didn't escape me. I briefly considered attending the funeral, but my anger consumed me. Have you ever felt so much rage toward a dead person that you wanted to strangle them? That's exactly how I felt. Going to the funeral might have somehow comforted Jennifer's parents, but it would have only worsened my anger. About an hour after the service was supposed to end, Jennifer's sister, Allison, called me. I knew it wouldn't be a pleasant conversation, but she needed to vent her emotions, especially if her parents hadn't told her the whole story. Jennifer was right, you're a terrible person with small dreams, a small mind, and a small future. You write for a small newspaper and have a small tool. I've always wondered why it took her so long to start cheating on you, and have a nice day. Allison, I responded calmly, I assume you knew about everything from the start. So why did you want me at the funeral if I'm such a terrible person? You embarrassed my parents. How can you explain why Jennifer's husband wasn't at the funeral? Everyone kept asking the same question. My parents were horrified when they had to explain to the pastor why you didn't come. You were awful, and I hope you suffer the same fate. Now you're starting to understand, I yelled into the phone. That's how I treated your sister and her lover when I caught them, and you know what? They got what they deserved, so please leave me alone. I hung up, feeling oddly triumphant. I think that conversation was a success, I told myself. I hired a real estate agent and immediately put the house up for sale. I moved my things into the guest room and sold all the bedroom furniture, including the sheets and pillowcases, at a very low price. I was never going to touch those things again. As for the rest of Jennifer's belongings, I took her jewelry, most of which I had given her, and sold it to a local jeweler, donating the money to the church food pantry. I packed up her clothes and everything else in boxes and brought them to my parents, telling them they could keep them or throw them away as they wished. These boxes contained our wedding album and the usual photos of us together. The image of Jennifer and David Price in our marital bed was burned into my memory, impossible to forget. Ron helped me unload the boxes from the truck, and when we finished, we hugged tightly with tears in our eyes. See you, I whispered, my voice trembling. In the first 2 weeks after Jennifer's death, I received a call from Crum & Miller Insurance. Jennifer and I had always paid a lot of attention to life insurance, so I knew the purpose of the call, but with so much on my mind, this matter wasn't a priority for me. Now that the urgent issues had been resolved, I realized it was time to address the insurance matters. Jennifer, who was well versed in the insurance business, had always taken the lead in making decisions about our policies. We discussed options, but in the end, I trusted her experience and knowledge to make the final decision. One of the decisions made was to insure each of our lives for $1 million, with a double indemnity clause in case of accidental death before age 45. For me, that meant a payout of $2 million. But then, the insurance agent mentioned something that almost made me choke on my coffee. Since the truck driver was at fault for the accident, his company would be liable for the wrongful death claim, unless I decided to go to court and sue them for maximum compensation. The attorney suggested aiming for another $2 million, but in his opinion, given the circumstances, an amount between $3 million to $4 million would be more appropriate. After deducting the lawyer's fees, I was set to have around $5 million in my bank account. After legal expenses, I received $4.5 million, but at that moment, I was so numb that I didn't care. The trucking company also reached a settlement with David Price's widow. Both sides had to sign the agreement at the same place and time. I had never met David's widow before, and although Jennifer was a beautiful woman, David's widow was no less stunning. I wondered why he would risk his marriage for an affair. Maybe he was so sure he wouldn't get caught that he didn't consider the risks. After completing the paperwork at the company, Mrs. Price invited me to have a cup of coffee with her. She had a question that no one could answer, and she hoped I could provide some clarity. "I didn't know my husband had a girlfriend named Jennifer Lawson," she said, almost in disbelief, and when they verified it. "But they were in the car together at the time of their deaths. It seems no one at David's office knows who she is, and they won't share this information with me. Who was this woman to my husband, Mr. Lawson?" Taking a deep breath, I stared at the table in the Starbucks where we were sitting. I didn't want to break the bad news to this incredibly attractive woman. "Oh, that's bad," she said, as if expecting more bad news. "Mr. Lawson, I believe I have the right to the truth," she pleaded. Reluctantly, I shared my version of the story with her. Her expression turned to surprise and disbelief, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Thank you for being honest," she said, and quickly left the coffee shop. Despite my newfound wealth, my life was far from satisfying. I wasn't interested in dating and was content with a modest apartment and few meaningful connections. Working at the newspaper was my only solace. I spent a lot of time biking and lifting weights each week, but I was just going through the motions. My dad, bless his heart, finally convinced me to see a therapist. The therapist diagnosed me with trust issues and recommended I communicate more and try to live a fuller life. I considered the session a waste of time and never returned. Now, I sit at home watching baseball, remembering the conversation I had with Allison after Jennifer's funeral 6 months ago. She definitely noticed that I write stories for the local paper. I took this job for convenience since it was the only vacancy near Jennifer's workplace. Because she earned more than I did, I put my ambitions of working for a larger publication on hold until Jennifer suggested we. In my apartment, I looked at my book collection, around 30 volumes, mostly nonfiction. Among the 2 fiction books was Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This triggered introspection, a habit some might consider risky. For me, abstract thinking had always been my strong suit, as evidenced by several tests during school long before the internet's hyperlink era. Often, I indulged in such reflections. As I pondered, I realized that my unique way of thinking often baffled my friends during deep discussions. They quickly learned not to ask me what-if questions. Suddenly, a new idea struck me. Jennifer was my eternal challenge, my white whale, but instead of hunting her in real life, I would do it through writing. So, I sat down at my computer and started writing a fictional story, the first since my school days, where the character based on David Price died, and the one based on Jennifer faced severe consequences. I felt a surge of strength that I had lacked for several months. Although I couldn't get revenge on Jennifer in reality, I could do so within the framework of my stories. Over the next 2 months, I wrote 17 more stories, each with its own twist but maintaining the theme of David's death and Jennifer's retribution. It was a satisfying way to vent my frustration. Each time I finished a book, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Putting it aside and then rereading the completed product was always a pleasure. One day, I came across Moby Dick, a real book with a cover and bound pages. I thought, I can do this, and that's exactly what I did. 6 months later, I completed my first novel. Although the character based on David met a terrible end, and the character based on Jennifer faced new challenges, I was proud of my work. It turned out that the publisher saw potential in my novel too. The deal wasn't perfect, but at least I didn't have to self-publish. Somehow, someone else appreciated my book, and the publisher even ordered 2 more copies. They wanted a second book and offered double the money, so I agreed. This time, I wrote a mystery crime novel where David died again and Jennifer got into trouble. However, the success of my novels brought a sense of achievement. Completing the book brought satisfaction to my life, and the high sales figures were a nice bonus. I felt validated seeing so many people agree with my thoughts on Jennifer. After the success of my second book, another publisher approached me, offering a lucrative 3-book contract. Although I was already wealthy, I decided to give my current publisher a chance to match the offer, which they did without hesitation. I spent 18 months with them, preparing 3 additional books. While each book's plot was similar, I changed the scripts and even added a bit of humor to the 3rd book. The 3 books were well received, but for me, the most important thing was the sense of accomplishment I felt with each completed book. I knew I would never get answers to my questions about Jennifer's actions, so I found comfort in my work, which was the closest thing to satisfaction. As they say, I learned to love what I had. Recently, I signed a new contract with the publisher for 3 more books, and this time, the price doubled. But that wasn't the only interesting news. A film studio was interested in turning at least 2 of my books into movies and even asked me to help with the screenplay, which I eagerly accepted. Although I'm not a huge fan of Oprah Winfrey, I couldn't deny the impact of her support when she chose my sixth book as one of her books of the month. I saw firsthand the incredible success that followed. It was amazing to see my success as an author recognized publicly. Despite some drawbacks of this newfound recognition, I knew it was a success. Although most people were polite and courteous, there were times when some felt the need to show their indifference towards me. That was fine by me because I didn't need anyone's approval. I was sitting in my favorite bar, enjoying a typical Friday night with my loyal companion when a state trooper gave me the terrible news about Jennifer's death. Despite my fortune now exceeding $10 million, I still found joy in life's simple pleasures, good drinks, staying fit, biking on open roads, and occasionally flirting with attractive women. I continued living in my modest apartment, not wanting a long-term romantic relationship. Some of the regulars at the bar might have discovered my achievements, but despite the occasional playful banter, most patrons generally kept their distance. When it came to my writing, no one mentioned reading my work, which didn't bother me too much since I suspected half of them couldn't even read. Neil, my favorite bartender, was aware of my success, and sometimes we discussed my works or projects I was working on. He was a trustworthy guy who didn't gossip about me, which I appreciated, probably because I always left him $20 each time I visited. Sitting at the bar, watching a nearby TV screen, and listening to the background music, I was lost in my own world when two women suddenly appeared beside me. Both were attractive and about my age, around 30, dressed casually in jeans and tops. They didn't seem to be trying to impress anyone, but there was something familiar about the woman farthest from me. It became clear as soon as she spoke. "You don't remember me, do you, Mr. Lawson?" she asked while her friend leaned back with a smirk. It was Mrs. Price, from when we signed the settlement agreement after the trucking company paid us for the deaths of our unfaithful spouses. After confirming that, yes, her husband had cheated on her with my wife. "I remember you, Mrs. Price. How are you?" "You look great, if I may say so," I replied. She blushed, glanced at her friend, then met my gaze. "Actually, I feel much better than the last time we talked, and I have you to thank for that, at least emotionally. David's death left me with $2 million, but I was devastated when he died, and when I found out he was cheating on me, I was crushed and furious. I was boiling with rage and realized I'd never have the chance to confront your cheating husband and tell him everything. I think one night Rachel brought your first book. She saw your name on the cover and remembered my story about our meeting. I started reading it reluctantly. It was only when I realized you were writing about our repulsive spouses that I couldn't stop reading. When the character based on David met his death, I felt a surge of relief, and when they got what they deserved, I felt a sense of vindication that I hadn't experienced since that terrible day. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly satisfied. I've read all your books. It might sound silly, but they brighten my day. I often laugh like a schoolgirl when David and Jennifer face difficulties. It's like that feeling I get when I finish writing a book myself. I can empathize with the heroes, and I'm glad I can help you in some way. Judging by the sales, it seems that many others can empathize with our experiences. I never thought of writing as a career, especially since I hadn't written fiction since the 8th grade. After receiving the settlement money and a significant amount from the insurance company, I felt that maybe that's why everything was going so smoothly. I decided to go with the flow as long as it brought pleasure. The three of us moved to a table, and I ordered some trays of snacks so we could nibble on something. We chatted until midnight when the ladies said it was time to go. I said I couldn't remember the last time I'd had such a pleasant evening and suggested we do it again. Ellie had stunning blue eyes and curves, while Rachel had long black hair and a toned figure reminiscent of a volleyball player, with long, slender legs and a slim back. Rachel wore a short, tight skirt that highlighted her best features. I couldn't help but feel a bit uncomfortable when two of the most attractive women were sitting at my table. Oh my God, I couldn't believe my luck. When I was lucky enough to have lunch at a restaurant with two amazing women, I thought, we had a great lunch and chatted enthusiastically as I got to know them better. But as the restaurant got crowded, I suggested we continue our evening with a drink at a nearby club. Rachel declined the offer, and Ellie and I went there together. The bar we ended up at was half full, allowing Ellie and me to have a quiet conversation. She immediately asked who had won, her or Rachel. The winner gets to stay with me, and the loser, she seemed surprised that I understood the female mind so well and blushed deeply. I was the winner, she admitted shyly. I hope so, I added nervously. Actually, I think I'm the winner, but that was when both were sitting with me, I joked. She blushed even more. Can I tell you something? She asked cautiously, frowning slightly. Her serious look made me wary, and I nodded hesitantly, unsure of where the conversation was going. When I left the lawyer's office after signing the settlement papers, I despised you. I knew you weren't involved in David's affair with Jennifer, but the fact that you found out before I did created a sense of superiority that I didn't like. It felt like you were hiding information from me, and I couldn't ignore that feeling. After the deaths of our unfaithful spouses, it felt like something out of a movie, not real life. A year later, Rachel handed me a book you wrote, pouring your heart out about the infidelity of our spouses. It was like a light bulb went off. I finally understood what had happened. For nearly a year, I went to therapy with a psychoanalyst, trying to work it all out. He immediately noticed the changes in my mood when I read your book and asked me to bring it to our next session. He said, "Excuse my expression, but this guy is a genius." It made me think, if I'm such a genius, why am I living in a rundown house with over $10 million in the bank? Ellie was surprised. She knew about my compensation and the insurance payout but didn't know I was so financially secure. I explained that when you're alone and afraid to trust others, money doesn't matter. I'm a simple man without special vices. I don't consider my writing a job, so I don't have a traditional role. I don't have a partner to share my life or finances with. When I admitted this to myself for the first time, I realized how sad my situation was. I was living in a fantasy world where every few months, I got revenge on fictional characters for their bad deeds. Although it was funny, I wasn't really living alone, I was just surviving. I sat at the table for what felt like an eternity, lost in my thoughts and paying no attention to the world around me. Then, as if out of nowhere, I felt a jolt of electricity on my lips. It wasn't from me, it was from Ellie, who kissed me passionately. Her tongue explored my mouth, igniting a fire within me. I returned the kiss eagerly, savoring every moment. After what felt like an eternity, she broke the kiss and told me to pay the bill and take her to my apartment. I snapped out of my stupor and fulfilled her request, feeling as if I had just woken from a dream. In the 4 years since Jennifer's death, I had been intimate with several women, but after my wife's death, I hadn't really made love to anyone. Ellie and I admitted that we hadn't had many partners since our previous relationships. We acted slowly and gently, exchanging deep, intense kisses. Our hands explored each other's bodies softly and slowly, truly savoring every touch. It was like we were following Stevie Wonder's lead. When we finally connected, the passion was incredible, and we shared an amazing and wild experience. For a moment, I lost all sense of time and space. When I returned to reality, I found myself lying gently on Ellie, using my hands to support myself as they began to tremble. I gently rolled us to the side so we were facing each other, watching as she slowly opened her eyes and tried to catch her breath. "Wow," she whispered softly, looking at me. We exchanged playful glances like teenagers, and finally, she spoke, expressing her understanding of what I had shared. I made her a sincere promise, vowing every day for the rest of our lives to prove I was worthy of her trust. In response, she accepted, realizing this wasn't a marriage proposal but a commitment to building a future together. Although we didn't marry immediately after that memorable night, it marked the beginning of our journey together. About a year later, we exchanged vows in a beautiful ceremony, confident we had overcome our personal struggles. We moved into a new, spacious house we built outside the city, with 5 bedrooms, 1 for us and the rest for the 4 kids we hoped to have. We built guest rooms to accommodate regular visitors, and I expanded the themes of my works beyond the revenge stories of Jennifer and David. Being with Ellie helped me realize I no longer needed to seek revenge with words, but I continued writing 1 or 2 revenge stories a year for the delight of my publisher, as they sold well. The success of my writing career, thanks to some good karma, allowed me to bring more passengers on board the story train. "Did you hear that Jason Benson is coming to visit us for the 4th time?" my friend Jeff asked. "No, I hadn't heard," I replied quietly. "He must have risen quite a bit in the military hierarchy." "I remember years ago, he was just a captain," Jeff confirmed. "That's impressive," I said, acknowledging his achievements. Jason Benson was considered the epitome of the all-American boy in our town. He was the best quarterback on the high school football team and a star shortstop in baseball. He graduated at the top of his class and received offers from Division I universities. He did well at West Point, graduating from high school as one of the top students. He played football and baseball, was a talented athlete, soldier, and citizen, which I had to admit, although he had qualities I didn't have. Usually, his success didn't bother me, but there was one problem. Even in school, he dated Sarah, who is now my wife. In school, everyone thought Sarah was perfect for Jason. She was an outstanding athlete, the second best student in her class, and considered the most beautiful girl in our town. Although they broke up when Jason enrolled at West Point and Sarah at Temple, they never resumed their relationship. I was 2 years older than them in school, not the best student, but still successful. I attended a public college in engineering and became increasingly interested in programming as computers became more present in my life. I gained experience working for several companies before finally mustering the courage to start my own. The decision to marry Sarah still haunts me, but somehow, I convinced her. This remains the greatest achievement of my life, or at least the most significant step I've taken on my own. Our 2 daughters are a joint effort and a source of pride for us. Sarah rarely mentioned Jason, understanding my discomfort with that chapter of her past. Occasionally, well-meaning people brought up his name, intimidating me with their expectations that I should value Jason and support the idea of Sarah being with him. It seemed my own thoughts and feelings about Jason were not taken into account. Many people thought Sarah would have been better off if she had stayed with Jason, but I want to praise Sarah's parents for never implying such a thing. Many years ago, at a family picnic, I witnessed how Sarah's mom visibly bristled when one of her cousins expressed the opinion that Sarah should have married Jason. It was an insensitive and painful comment that only a fool would make in front of a shocked and silent crowd. Sarah's usual composure failed, piquing my interest. Sarah explained that the hotel had generously donated a room for a local military hero. She emphasized that it was all a matter of good public relations since the hero's parents had moved away from Williamsport, and he had nowhere else to stay. Sarah reasoned that it made sense to give a room to a man who had been injured in service to his country and who would act as the Grand Marshal in the upcoming 4th of July parade. "It's just good business," she insisted, raising her voice slightly. I couldn't help but ask why she was so worried if there was nothing to worry about. Sarah reluctantly admitted, "Well, maybe a little. It's just that we've always tried to avoid the topic of Jason. I know how you feel about the fact that we dated in high school and how annoying it is when people keep mentioning his name. This is strictly a business matter, Sam. You're my husband, the only man I love and have ever loved. You have to believe that." "I'm really glad to hear you say that, Sarah, and I want to believe you." The question came up because I found it necessary to hide Jason's return from me. I asked. "I knew it was a sensitive issue, and I didn't want you to worry or get upset." "He simply means nothing to me," Sarah objected. "Then there should be no reason for me to be upset, and you should have no reason to hide information, right?" I replied. "No, Sam, not really. I'm glad we're discussing this openly. The ghost of Jason has been hovering over us since we got married, or even before," I added. "So, are there other events planned?" I asked. "Colonel Vaughn will lead the parade and host an informal reception at the hotel the next day," Sarah said. "The hotel will provide appetizers and drinks, and people will have the chance to make a good impression on him. Do you have any problems with that?" Sarah inquired. "I don't think it matters, Sarah. The die has already been cast, and the plans have been set. I may not be involved in this, but I can handle it if you're honest with me. He means nothing to you, right? You're not going to look at him like a deer in the headlights, right?" I questioned. Sarah reacted to my statement with annoyance, but her expression quickly changed to a smile when she caught my play on words. She hugged me and expressed her love, saying, "Sam, I love you so much. You're the only man who's caught the attention of this mass or any other part of her body." We both laughed at her playful comment. "I hope this applies to everything, not just your eyes," I responded with a grin. "You know it's all I have, darling," Sarah whispered softly. "It's all unique and all for you." After walking through the living room, we told the girls that we were too tired to eat and that we were going to bed. "You'll have to make do with the leftover roast beef from last night." "Too tired?" June laughed. "We better cover our ears. The last time you were that exhausted, you kept us awake half the night." Sarah blushed and said, "Maybe we should wait until the girls are asleep," and closed our bedroom door. "I don't want them to suspect. They already think we have some kind of intimate business," I said to Sarah, and we surrendered to intimacy. The next night, as Sarah was preparing dinner, I casually asked how her day had been, knowing I was really asking about Jason and what was going on between them. "It was fine, Sam. Jason has become even more determined and energetic than he was in school. I think his service as an officer and his involvement in the war have developed his natural leadership qualities, Sarah replied. Sarah, I appreciate your perspective on Jason's growth as a leader, but let's be honest. When I asked for honesty, I didn't expect praise. I want to know the truth about his effect on you and why you chose me over him. That kind of honesty is exactly what I want to hear, I expressed. Sam, even if this guy is an Army Ranger and a war hero, strong and tough, he's still not up to your level, Sarah said. That's the spirit. You can tell me the details, I prompted. Well, the President of the United States personally called Jason today to thank him for his outstanding service. But don't forget, just a few years ago, you were the vice president of the losing club. Jason isn't even a member, Sarah explained. I nodded in agreement. The guy probably thinks he's too good for the club, I said. He'll never be the treasurer of a football club, that's for sure. He's a loser, Sarah added, nodding in agreement. That's exactly what I was thinking. More likely than not, tomorrow after the parade, he'll fail his interview on Fox News, and his book segment will be boring. It's unlikely he'll make general until he's 50, I commented, almost shouting. This is a real test of character. There should be rewards for this, anyone can get into trouble. I have to admit, Sam, that it helps a lot when we communicate honestly and like adults, Sarah smiled. No one compares to my man, she added. I hugged Sarah tightly as she looked at me, and I kissed her passionately. Why don't we find a more private spot? Someone joked as April entered the room and said, This is the kitchen where I cook. Sarah blushed and tried to pull away, but I held her back. Dad, you really love Mom, don't you? April teased. Do you think I'll ever find someone who loves me the same way? Not until you graduate from college, I replied. You won't have any trouble finding guys, Sarah assured April. Admiring April's face, I turned to leave, feeling my own cheeks heat up. Raising daughters can be tough, I reflected. The parade was a success, and cable news teams covered Colonel Vaughn, a rising star who embodied everything the media wanted to see on Independence Day. After watching his evening interview, I had to admit that he was charismatic and eloquent. There was pride in him when he spoke about being an American. The day after the parade was total chaos. Sarah left early to make sure everything was in order for the open house they were hosting for Vaughn. The presence of a cable news team staying at her hotel only added to her stress. I decided to show my gratitude for everything Sarah does for me and the girls, so I went to Jeff's jewelry store. After considering several options, I settled on a pair of diamond earrings as a token of appreciation. Jeff tried to convince me to buy a necklace, but I had already maxed out my budget and bought the earrings. As I walked through the main conference room, I observed Colonel Vaughn. Despite everyone in town seeming to look down on him, he remained humble and polite, earning my respect. Sarah managed the event effectively, ensuring everything went smoothly. The hotel had a good reputation in the city thanks to well-organized business practices. The event was supposed to end at 6, but by 7:30, a handful of followers and admirers were still lingering, unwilling to leave until the free food and drinks were gone. Anticipating the imminent end of the meeting, I sneaked into Sarah's office unnoticed. My plan was to surprise her with the earrings I brought and then extend an invitation to a neighborhood party where she could show off her new jewelry to her friends. After waiting for Sarah for 15 minutes, I decided to use her bathroom. While finishing washing my hands, the sound of the office door closing caught my attention. My smile quickly disappeared when I realized that I now heard a man's voice in the room. The door to the room was slightly ajar, allowing me to easily listen to the conversation. I can't help but tell you again, you look amazing, Sarah. Just being near you drives me crazy. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever been with, said Jason's voice. My stomach churned, and sweat broke out on my forehead. I felt dizzy and had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. That's very flattering, Colonel, but please refrain from making such statements about me. I'm happily married, and I don't want any misunderstandings, Sarah replied firmly. It was a long time ago, let's leave it in the past, Sarah added. I feel like there's still something between us. I noticed it during our work together these past few days. And please, call me Jason, Jason continued. I agreed to come here for the holidays just to see you again, and I have to say, it was worth it. Surely you wanted to show off in front of your hometown residents during the parade, Sarah said. You're a local guy who has achieved great success. Sarah expressed her admiration for his bravery and accomplishments, acknowledging him as a true war hero. Jason pleaded with Sarah to join him, as he had to leave early the next morning. He offered to express his gratitude for her contribution to the country's development and to her personally. The idea made me feel sick, but I held back the urge to vomit, knowing Sarah would realize I was listening. I focused on breathing to keep my composure, managing to control myself and calm down. "I'm married, Jason," Sarah said. "My husband would suspect something immediately and would be upset, to say the least." "I've seen him, Sarah. He's not the kind to make trouble. I've had plenty of guys like him under my command, they never challenged me." "He wouldn't dare say anything to you," Jason reasoned. "A girl's practice and a change of clothes don't prepare a man for battle." I could feel the contempt in Jason's voice as he laughed at his comment. It was clear he didn't have much respect for me. "Jason, why don't you stay a few more days if you want to see me more often?" Sarah asked in a devoted tone. "I can make your room accessible without any unnecessary distractions." "I can't, Sarah," Jason replied. "I have to go to Washington tomorrow. It's all part of climbing the corporate ladder. I've dedicated over 20 years and a lot of effort to this cause, and I'm getting closer to my goal." Sarah asked Jason if it was true that the Rangers have a rule of never leaving a comrade behind, to which Jason proudly confirmed. He explained that they take an oath to always have each other's backs, emphasizing the importance of trust. Sarah offered to go to his room, provoking Jason with the chance to spend the night with a real hero. Jason found her offer tempting. "Sarah, I don't quite understand some things. Could you explain them to me?" Sarah asked. "Of course, Sarah. I'd be happy to explain everything so we can move on to a sweet night," Jason responded. "Jason, why do you think you're better than my husband? Do heroes need medals and decorations to be considered heroes?" Sarah questioned. "I'm not sure I understand the question," Jason replied slowly. "Your husband has never put his life on the line, never served in a war. He stayed home, supported the girls' classes, and attended parent-teacher conferences. He didn't do anything brave. Sam took over our daughter's football team when the coach was injured in a car accident, and no one else volunteered. At first, he didn't even know the rules. He spent time studying books and searching the internet to learn. Despite the difficulties and mistakes, he remained a pillar of support, especially for the girls," Sarah retorted. "Not only did he care for my father after his stroke, showing love and dedication," Sarah proudly called me her hero, and Jason recognized my good qualities despite his doubts about men who don't do such duties. "Jason, this reaction is unacceptable. Sam worked the night shift all year so he could attend the girls' events. The following year, he took on 2 jobs to help us save for the down payment on the house. When he found our daughter June smoking in the garage with her friends, he knelt her down in front of them and punished her. June burst into tears, expressed her anger at him, and ran to her room. He stayed up all night worried about her. The next day, she apologized and promised never to smoke again, then hugged him," Sarah recalled. "This is what it means to be a true family man. Jason, how do you expect me to break my oath? You preach honesty, yet you don't hesitate to demand I break mine," Sarah said, her tone growing increasingly firm. "You say you've dedicated so much time to your career and don't want to risk it. But what about my career and investments? You didn't hesitate to jeopardize my job and my marriage by bragging about your accomplishments. Do you really value me and my life, either? Haven't I spent 2 decades building my life, my marriage, my career?" She demanded answers. "After hearing your point of view, Sarah, I understand I may have gotten carried away. I just think you're incredibly beautiful, and we've had some unforgettable moments," Jason admitted hesitantly. "But those memories belong to you, not me," Sarah responded with a brief nod. He apologized and abruptly left, closing the door behind him. I hesitated in the bathroom, afraid that Sarah would discover I had heard their conversation. Fortunately, I heard the office door open and close again, meaning he had left. After ensuring everything was clear, I headed to my car and crossed the parking lot, dialing Jeff's number. Later, while helping the girls in the kitchen, I eagerly awaited Sarah's return. When she finally arrived, I couldn't help but say, "Sarah, I'm so glad you're home." She explained that she was busy with paperwork, but I pulled her close and kissed her, feeling a surge of emotion as I hugged her. My heart filled with joy to the brim. Finally, I pulled back, unable to contain my feelings for her. "Wow, Mom, Dad looks so happy when he sees you, doesn't he?" June laughed. I hope my husband greets me the same way after 2 decades of marriage. Sarah looked at me, trying to understand why I was so glad to see her and why she didn't need to explain her delay. June, I hope you find a husband like our dad, Sarah nodded in agreement. He's always full of surprises and loves his family so much. I pulled a small, beautifully wrapped package from the drawer and handed it to Sarah. She took it carefully, examining it and setting the paper aside. She picked up the box with a sense of anticipation, slowly lifted the lid, and as she saw what was inside, tears filled the eyes of all 3 people in the room. The space was filled with a feeling of warmth and tenderness, and the air enveloped the space. She gently inserted the earrings into her ears, and my daughters noticed my expression. "Dad, are you crying?" June asked. I replied, "They're tears of joy, and there's no one in the world better than our mom."